Hello, I'm Fiona Ferista. I'm a PhD student at University College London. I will be moderating the next ISIC plenary session. We just heard from Pak Budi Gunadi Sadikin, Minister of Health, regarding how Indonesia learns from the past to avoid the same mistake, faces the present to improve the situation we already in, and prepares for the future for the ever-evolving pandemic. And we also heard from His Excellency Mahendra Siregar about how Indonesia ensures fairness and equality for every country in the fight against coronavirus pandemic, because we know no one is safe until everyone is safe. It is now my pleasure to begin the conversation with experts, government officials, and scholars regarding how to keep everyone in Indonesia safe, how to prepare, and how to be resilient to face the ongoing pandemic and the future pandemic, since history always repeats itself. So we are now joined by Professor Amarila Malik from Faculty of Pharmacy, Universitas Indonesia. And then we also have Pak Faisal Basri from Institute for Development of Economics and Finance, INDEF. And we also have Dr. Ines Atmosukarto from John Curtin School of Medical Research, Australia National University, and Lipotech Proprietary Limited. Thank you very much for joining us today. We also actually have Professor Abdul Qadir that will be joining us soon. So our speaker will share their expertise and then will be followed by a Q&A session. I would like to start by talking about the beginning of the pandemic. Indonesia seemed to be struggling to accommodate the sudden increase in demands of PPE and testing facilities. Fast forward to 2021, we are now struggling again with the vaccine supplies. So what are the strategies to ensure that this will not happen again? So hopefully Professor Amarila can answer this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Fiona, for a nice introduction. Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As requested, I will give a talk on pharmaceuticals and medical supplies issues in Indonesia during the COVID-19 pandemic. These issues are highly relevant as we are all currently struggles to tackle the second wave of COVID-19, which the issues on vaccines, the sudden increase in demands of PPE, lab supplies, drugs, and other pharma and medical supplies are currently on the rise. Next slide, please. Since the pandemic started in early 2020, and based on the news on mainstream media, our questions are, what have been our efforts and strategies to overcome this problem so far? Can we ensure the innovation that we are developing today are well-purposed, well-evaluated, appropriate, applicable, and sustainable? Next, please. Next slide, please. The Indonesian government allocated billions of money for innovations during the pandemic. Several concerns have been addressed on how suppression of imports can be done towards independence of raw materials. One, we have been resorting to importing medical devices and supplies, so while it is feasible to establish such factories in our country. Two, the high demand in pharma and medical devices supplies during this pandemic should not be enjoyed by the foreign business only. Three, to put restrictions on importing raw materials for the upstream pharma sector. Four, to recommend Biopharma, the Indonesia state-owned pharmaceutical company, to become Southeast Asia's COVID-19 vaccine hub. And last one, we all know that in 2020, the government proposed a consortium on vaccine Merah Putih development, the Indonesian homemade vaccine. And ultimately, all of these concerns obviously need supportive policies on tax and fiscal with a flexible regulation. Next slide, please. Then let's see the challenges and strategies to overcome the supplies issues that should be tackled by local businesses and industries. I may not have the answer to these questions due to the complicated nature, but we may be able to overcome the challenge with some strategic approaches. Next slide, please. Here, let us investigate challenges in vaccine development and manufacturing as an example for pharma supplies, because it is a hot issue nowadays. Although vaccine production is known as one of the exceptionally challenging pharma products beside biological drugs. From this picture, we can see 8 challenges in vaccine production, followed by challenges in vaccine distribution. The 8 challenges issues are including supply chain, expensive, mutation, the personnel, the exposure, and then large clinical trials, low success rate, and standardization. Next slide, please. In normal circumstances, vaccine development takes about 10 to 15 years to be done. However, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the process of this pipeline must be accelerated. Next slide, please. The vaccine development of traditional and outbreak paradigm is compared here, which the latter is accelerated by 10-fold. The traditional needs 15 years, while the outbreak paradigm has to be finished in 1.5 years. We accelerate by overlapping several stages to expedite the process on the rapid manufacturing, the testing, and the emergency use authorization. Next slide, please. In order to be independent, we should focus on the high quality facilities for vaccine production with the standards of good laboratory practice, GLP, good clinical study practice, GCP, and good manufacturing practice, GMP. Next slide, please. Now let's move to the challenges in the medical device development and manufacturing. Here, the example is the diagnostic or detection kit. The challenge comes from their own required feature for diagnostic kits. One, they should be an immunochemical diagnostic method of blood-based as qualitative tests. 2, they must be easy to use. 3, they must be a quick diagnostic. 4, they must have a high diagnostic rate. And 5, they must be non-invasive. Next slide, please. And this one is the most used rapid antigen test kit for COVID-19 in Indonesia. On the left is the original box imported from abroad. On the right is what is claimed as Indonesia-made rapid antigen test kit. As you can see, the box color red and white like our flag. But do we really manufacture this? Or was it just repackaging of the kits from the original country, the original one? But the brand name then still the same, plus identity of Indonesia, IND. This kit has several advantages and features. First, it can detect IgM and IgG antibodies to COVID-19 in a single test. Second, it has easy visual interpretation. Third, it can show results in 15 to 20 minutes only. And fourth, it does not require special facilities or equipment. This is kind of favorable detection kit. Next slide. And this one is a real-time RT-PCR kit for detection of SARS-CoV-2 that's available in the lab supplies market. And we have been importing the kits from abroad. Can we manufacture this in the country? Or the technology is too advanced? Let's check the components. The components consist of premix, the enzyme, and the control reaction. And this kit requires only the expected results showed within 1 hour, and it claims it has high accuracy. Next slide, please. So here's the steps for development such kit, which is very complicated. Where do we want to start to be independent in the material procurement? We can select few items, which is easier to get compared to some other items, depending on the current situation. For example, next please. Start with obtaining, still previous slide. Yeah. Start with obtaining a bulk supplies of reagent components on the right. The reagent components consist of the primers, the enzyme, and etc. And the next step, the number 2, is laboratory tests. And lastly, to package them locally so that we can label them with local label. And then go to next level, start making our own. For example, the enzyme, the buffers, the primer order imported, as well as the NTPs and the dyes. And then next, independently produce all components. And we need to identify our strength, but we all should be motivated to improve more. Next slide, please. So here's the strategy, the potential strategy to solve our current problem. Next slide, please. The following are steps to be included in a roadmap to gradually eliminate dependency on imports. First step is to develop the infrastructure. Indonesia has done this. Next, click. And we do not need more research buildings. The second is to gather experts and develop research projects in form of technology transfer. Indonesia has the adequate number of experts to conduct research, but inadequate current technology. Click, please. The third step is to establish all infrastructure together with experts and research. This, without doubt, click, please, require a large sum of funding. And finally, click, please, we will be able to be independent of imports and maybe establish ourselves as manufacturer of medicinal raw materials, medical device, or other medical related items for the region. Next slide. Next slide, please. The whole process of vaccine development must follow WHO target product profile. Vaccine development consists of preclinical discovery, preclinical development, clinical development, process development, and GMP bulk manufacture. In Indonesia, click please. We are currently able to do GMP bulk manufacture. For example, Sinovac's CoronaVac manufactured by Bio Farma. And then, click please. There is also a development of our own national vaccine, Vaksin Merah Putih, which start from preclinical discovery. You can imagine how to get to the vaccine manufacturer. It's a long way to get there. So is it possible to start the vaccine development, not from preclinical development, but click please. For example, from the pre-GMP master seed bank or process development. And indeed, under a strong G2G agreement for partnership. We also need to pay attention to supporting infrastructure for basic raw material, chemical industries, and biotech industry to support the pipeline of vaccine development. Do we intend to invest in these industries too? Next slide, please. An example, a country famous with reputation as pharmacy of the world is India. As a country with similar condition as our country, they proudly claim their indigenous COVID-19 vaccine. We should learn from them, but actually, we have been developed vaccine manufacturers. They have been developed vaccine manufacturers since decades. Next slide, please. There are several ways to be less dependent on import material. Here are some steps to be conducted locally, like synthesizing oligoprimers, producing enzymes, synthesizing component, making high quality buffer, etc. As an example, click please. For synthesizing oligoprimers, we must encourage ourselves to develop in-house nucleic acid synthesis platform for custom oligo manufacturing use in PCR. Click please. And then the second, for enzyme production, this is an example which an enzyme for PCR, which already got a US patent, the high fidelity hot start polymerase. Next slide, please. The development of nucleic acid synthesis platform can be performed by a DNA synthesizer, and the cost of the machine can be checked online based on my research. The prices are rather affordable. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And for the development of an enzyme, here is an example of robust Pcr enzyme, which already granted a US patent that involves very complicated steps and took an exhausting effort. Therefore, for the beginning, we can just purchase the polymerase enzyme from a company specialized in producing biotech essential products. Like, next slide, please. Like this one. This is a small company in China. They call themselves the PCR company, BioLine PCR company. So our country should start thinking of establishing companies like this. Imagine if we have established such company, we can save money and be independent in the supplies of COVID-19 detection kit. Next slide, please. And ultimately, another giant company serving all the COVID-19 research and detection commodities, including material for detection kit, antibodies, peptides, enzyme, etc., for a large quantity purchase with very affordable price. The SBS biotech company, gene tech company in China. So you can easily find their website in the internet. So for short-term solution for the resilient yet partly independent diagnostic detection kit supplies, we can buy in bulk quantities, the PCR enzymes, the DNTPs, etc., or part of them, but the buffers we can develop in local laboratories, and the primers that we produce locally too by buying the machine. Then we formulate the PCR mix and do packaging by local businessmen in Indonesia and put local brand. We should grab this kind of business opportunity to stimulate local pioneer life sciences industries to serve domestic and the region. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, to maximize the fulfillment of demand for pharma and medical supplies in Indonesia resiliently yet independently during the pandemic and sustain for the future, a breakthrough in the implementation of an endurance roadmap should include comprehensively a good investment while gaining high technology, guided by sustained management with GLP, GCP, and GP standards, and obviously talented yet highly trained and highly skilled human resources in various sectors involving stakeholders led by the government. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Amarila, for a very clear explanation about how can we be more prepared in terms of logistics. So we need to prepare for the investment and also the management and definitely the human resources. Talking about investment, that means we're talking about finance, money, and the economy. So another questions is probably something that can be answered by someone that we are very fortunate to have, Pak Faisal Basri, that can share his expertise in economics. Because the question is it true that a country has to choose between saving the economy or people's life? And can these two actually go hand in hand to end this pandemic? And how can Indonesia's economic policy help to support the public health measures? So hopefully, Pak Faisal Basri can answer this.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here, sharing with you. And it's great honor also to me, and thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar. Let's start with one question should be answered by organizer. We have to realize that this time is very different compared to previous crises, even with Great Depression 100 years ago. The crisis this time is different, triggered by global pandemic, previously triggered by financial sector. So almost all economists agreed that saving life is saving the economy. What happened was not only economic and health disruption, but in almost all aspects of social, cultural, political, and defense life. Getting the coronavirus under control is prerequisite to saving the economy, to saving livelihood. That's why policymakers have to prioritize public health spending in addition to economic support. Healing must be with a new mindset, interdisciplinary, and involve all stakeholders. So unfortunately, we haven't followed this principle. That's why you see here that our recovery speed is the lowest among our peers. Yeah. See here the light blue compared to all peers, our peers. The highest speed is Philippines, followed by Turkey, India, Mexico, and so on and so forth. So I think this is the direct result of what we are doing to deal with pandemic, because the government, the government is very biased to the economy. As you can see, the organizational structure here, chaired by coordinating minister of economic affairs. So you see here executive office under Minister of BUMN, state-owned enterprise, almost dominated by economic sector minister level. So what can we do about this? So they put economy first, and health is the second, by using the term gas dan rem. This is a kind of trial and error. We cannot do this kind of approach because the risk is very high. The livelihood, lives of the people. And you can see also here, government view that this year will be over, everything will be back to normal. That's why the government increased very sharply spending for infrastructure, reached the highest level in the history, from 281 trillion to 400, more than 400, and allocation for health decrease from 200 to 170 trillion. You see the attitude of the government, our government. It cannot be tolerable. But of course, after having second waves, the government reallocate the budget to increase allocation for health. Okay, the cost is very high. We have to avoid a kind of what we call it key safe recovery. I will explain later on, but you can see here the impact of pandemic to the rich groups is insignificant, and the income or the wealth of the wealthiest in Indonesia actually is increasing compared to pre-pandemic level. We measure material power index. We compare average of 40 richest in Indonesia based on Forbes, divided by GDP per capita. You see the difference is very huge, more than 700,000 times, increased to 600 times, more than 600 times, and now last year increased quite sharply to more than 750,000. And next 4 years will reach close to 1 million times. So the rich getting richer, the poor is getting poorer. Here the condition, and if you look at this, we divide simple average with median value, and we have this value. Indonesia is relatively high compared to our close neighboring country like Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and so on and so forth. So something wrong in our development process, bias to the rich. We call it oligarch. Many policies, including in attacking coronavirus, benefit more to the rich one. For example, subsidy for biofuel producer allocated in our budget last year, 2.7 trillion rupiah, benefited only 11 to 12 producers. So this is the situation when we are facing the virus. Number of insecure population in 2019 in Indonesia is almost 53% of the total population. So almost more than half of our population living in insecure condition, compared to Malaysia, for example, only 2.9%, Thailand 6.2%. So that's make the government worried, to lock down because the government has to give food to around 143 million population. Yeah. It's bigger. Insecure population is bigger than number of recipients of National Health Insurance Contribution Assistance or PBI-JKN in 2020, only 96.8% or 96.8 million, or much higher than number of extreme poor, 27.55 million or 10.2% in September 2020. So we are dealing with a very vulnerable, situation. That's why it is not effective to make restrictions, because they don't have money to be self-isolation. As I said, the rich getting richer, and they put their money more and more in banks, as you can see here, third party fund in banking sector increase always a double digit in the last almost a year, every month, every month. And the bank don't utilize this money to channel to credit. The credit growth contracted in the last 7 consecutive months. So where the money in banking sector go, they buy government bonds. You see, government bonds owned by banks increase very sharply from 27% to 38% March this year. So the largest buyer of government debt, because government issue more and more debt, you know, we call it SBN, Surat Berharga Negara, or SUN, Surat Utang Negara. All of them called government bonds. So you see, the rich getting richer, and the poor getting poorer. They cannot get credit from banking sector. Better for the bank buy government bonds. And who are there? 2/3 of employees work without any written work contract. Only 1/5 under fixed term or temporary contract. See? So very fragile the situations. We have to realize these situations, yeah, and we have to make sure they get food needed to stay alive. I don't want to share this. What I want to see exactly is, okay, the money, government money from debt distributed for development and so on and so forth, by it's very unproductive one. If we would like to build one bridge, we need 6.5 units of additional capital. In the past, you know, only need 4 to 4.5 unit of capital, and the highest in ASEAN. So we call it boros, you know, many leakage because of corruption and so on and so forth. That's why we are facing a more difficult situation. The government need more money because the unit cost to build everything is very high. And who are there in terms of education? The poor, the 52.8% of the population called insecure. 57% of the labor force has only a lower secondary education, less than 9. So not completed junior high school even. And if we increase the school year, they can get a higher wage with on average improved by 6.7% per additional 1 year. Okay, but it's still lower than East Asia on average and Vietnam. They are having 10%. And okay, we will have a new generation already there. And hopefully the kids now will get a longer year, 12.4 years when they are in productive category. But that's equal only to 7.8 years due to poor quality in many Indonesian primary and secondary. We hope Mas Menteri will solve this problem, and I think he has new mindset, new breakthrough, and we hope we can get the better results. And let's move to business profile. 98.7% are micro, and almost all of them are in informal sector. So we have to improve. We have to upgrade them from pyramid types or pyramid shape to diamond shape. So we decrease the micro, increase small and medium, and also let stay the large as it is. So we have to do research, as Ibu Amalia said, in pharmaceutical sector. No need to be very big, small companies can be encouraged to reduce our dependency on imports of raw materials for medicine in Indonesia. As you know, 90 to 95% of raw materials come from imports. So this will strengthen the condition of the people. So what I say before, we have to make sure this not happen. The rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and they need more time to recover from current conditions. I think my time is over, but let me share you this. Okay, so education
Pak
and
Faisal,
health.
sorry. Pak Faisal,
Yeah,
sorry, you still
yeah.
can have 3 more minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have to strengthen two main variables: educations and health. It will improve social mobility of the people. If my parents is poor, I have the higher probability to be not poor anymore. So unfortunately, our social mobility is very, very low, less than 50 here. Yeah, our friend is only India, Turkey, Thailand, and Russia. And because of the lack of social mobility, distribution of the wealth, distribution of income, inequality is very high. As you can see here, the top 1%, the richest 1%, control almost 45% of the total wealth in Indonesia. So don't be silent. We have to move to this direction. What is the key? Democracy. Yeah. Don't buy the campaign done by a certain segment of society by saying enak zaman kuto. Yeah, Soeharto said enak zaman kuto. No, no. Democracy is our initial capital to do the better way in the future. So there is positive correlations between democracy and the welfare of the people. As you can see here, Norway, Denmark, high democracy index and high income per capita. So there are some countries here, high income per capita by low democracy, but this is an exception. Singapore, Hong Kong, and several oil producers country. This is China. It's not our model also. So we have to go to this direction, maintaining our democracy, decline our democracy index last year quite sharply, but we have to put them back to the track. Consolidation of democracy should be continued. So democracy does cause growth, and growth strengthens the resilience of the people in facing another shock or another crisis in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Faisal Basri. That's very interesting. So if I can sum up a little bit, so we have a huge number of vulnerable people that is hit the hardest by the pandemic, and we have to invest in education and health to increase the social mobility of our people. And then how is the key to growth is the democracy. So it will increase the growth and the resilience of our people in Indonesia. Talking about democracy, so we have with us Dr. Ines that probably can answer questions about science-based policy. What can we learn from other countries such as Australia, and what could be the best practice in science-informed policymaking for Indonesia? Thank you for Dr. Ines for joining us.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you for the invitation to share a bit of my experience of riding the pandemic in Australia, while at the same time watching what is happening in Indonesia. So it is kind of a bit of a surreal experience, because in Australia we have been quite safe, as you'll see in how I describe it in the next slides. And for example, where I live in Canberra, we haven't had a case for a year. So yesterday, I think we celebrated zero community transmission in my city. But at the same time, I'm watching with despair the dire situation in Indonesia. And I think there are quite a few learning points that we need to take from what has happened in Indonesia to actually build a resilient country, so that we will hopefully never have to go through what we are going through now in Indonesia. So if you give me the chance, I'll go through what's been happening in Australia, and how what's been good and what's been bad, and how maybe we can learn from that. So I'll start with the numbers first, because you probably haven't been following what's going on in Australia, because it's a bit boring, really. So on the left here are the daily new confirmed COVID-19 cases since the pandemic started, or since March, since it was formally declared a pandemic. And you can see that Australia went through two big waves. I mean, but in the scheme of things, and compared with what's happening in Jakarta now, it's nothing. As you can see on the y-axis, this is 500 cases at the height of our biggest wave. So the first waves were definitely triggered by returning travelers, because we all know that the pandemic started in China, but the returning travelers that were bringing the viruses back in Australia were actually mostly from Europe. At that stage, and interestingly, we had a lot of cases that came from cruises. So ships and cruises turned out to be very big sources of infection for Australia. Australians love to go on cruises, and they would go to cruises in Europe and come back with the virus. So this first wave triggered some pretty sharp, fast and sharp responses in Australia, which really brought down the numbers down. And then we had a second wave, which was centered mostly in Melbourne. So where I am, I did not feel this second wave. This second wave really was driven by Melbourne, and they had a quite a big outbreak there through the aged care facilities, and we lost a lot of elderly patients in healthcare facilities through this pandemic. So there was quite a lot of learnings here. But again, Australia managed to suppress it, and was able to really keep the numbers down until, I mean, as you can see now, the trend is going up, and going up not very sharply because of all the systems that we have in place here. But they are going up, driven mostly by Delta. Death in Australia has been relatively low. The numbers, as you can see, as I'm comparing here on this graph, the death cases in Australia compared with what Indonesia is saying. So from a numbers point of view, Australia has managed, and it has always been one of the examples of countries that were able to handle the pandemic quite well last year. It remains to be seen whether what we are doing here is going to be sufficient to keep us safe from Delta. So what has the strategy been? So if we look back again, let's go back to the beginning of the year, of last year, when the pandemic started, and you can see that Australia started to impose travel restrictions very early, right? On the 1st of February, it imposed travel restrictions from China. On the 1st of March, it imposed travel restrictions from Iran, then from South Korea, then from Italy. So based on what was happening overseas, Australia started to ban arrival from certain countries. Then, as we could see that we were not getting a handle on what was happening, more local restrictions were put, and that's because we were getting cases into the community. So they started reducing or putting limits on the number of people that could gather together. And then at the end of March, there was a total lockdown. So this is something that I experienced here as well. From the last week of March, there was a total lockdown. Even our access to the university was completely blocked. Our key cards would not work at the university. Everybody had to stay at home. And we weren't allowed to gather outside with more than 2 people. So although we were allowed to go outside, you could only go outside in pairs. So everywhere you'd go out, you'd see people just in pairs doing some exercise or just walking outside. And this continued until the end of March. And by May, the numbers had come down, so they slowly started to reduce the restrictions. And by June, we were allowed to go back to work. Things started to go back to normal in most of Australia, but as you can see, then Victoria or Melbourne started to have issues by the end of July. And again, then they went into lockdown. So here the lockdowns go in stages. You've got stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. As you can see, it started to implement, as it wasn't getting hold of things, it started to implement more severe restrictions to try and bring down the numbers. So there was some very clear, and we now know what happens when we see numbers going up. We know that restrictions will be coming. What about since then? As I said, Australia has aimed for zero COVID, right? So every time we reach zero COVID, back to zero COVID, it's a big celebration here because that has been the aim of the government. Although the government is now changing these and I'll discuss this later, but as the vaccination reaches more people, then the aim will shift from this zero COVID to living with COVID, but that depends on a high vaccination rate. So since then, various capital cities have experienced lockdowns, as I've said, when things progress, or when cases come into the population, and if the contact tracers feel that there's too many unlinked cases, then they are very quick to impose lockdowns. And lockdowns really mean lockdowns here. Who is allowed to go to work is really only the essential workers. You are only allowed to go out for shopping, shopping as in food shopping, going down to the grocery and going down to the pharmacy and to your doctors. But apart from that, there's not much that you can do. They start to impose radiuses, so you're not allowed to go, even if you're going to your grocery, more than 5 kilometers from your house, depending on the stages of lockdowns. And they have hard borders between the states, right? So it's not just locking, it's not just locking down. It's like if you have to travel, for some reason, you can't even travel between the different states. It becomes like very, very tight. And if cases start to jump from one state to the other, then other states start to shut their borders, right? So it's a very strict system that they are imposing. When you travel in the states as well, and if the state that you're coming from has an outbreak, but you are not in the lockdown area, sometimes they will impose home isolation on you, and home isolation can be for about 2 weeks. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, my daughter, who goes to uni in Sydney, decided to leave Sydney before their lockdown to come back here. And then they decided to impose retrospective home isolation. So if you'd come from Sydney less than 2 weeks ago, then you had to isolate at home. And this is really to try and restrict the movements of people until you are sure that those people that come from different areas do not carry the virus, then your movements are restricted. And then depending on what is happening in the state as well, they have other restrictions like mask wearing, restrictions on dining. They have a very strict rule on 4 square meters per people. So there's a very small number of people that are allowed to be in restaurants, and limitations on the number of people that can attend weddings and funerals. So what are the tools that they've been using during all this time? Testing, obviously. Testing and tracing has been how Australia's been managed to keep on top of things, right? So, and on this graph on the left, I've been trying to compare the level of testing done in Australia compared to the level of testing done in Indonesia. So this is tests conducted by thousands of people, and you can say that Australia tests like 5 times more, despite the fact that we have very little cases, right? So remember, we are testing more here, but we have almost, we have barely any cases here. And the testing is actually done to identify, the people that are definitely positive. And then the tracing starts, and they try to actually identify where you've been, at what time, how long for, who you've been meeting, and every evening they will put out on the television the list of places where infected people might have been to. And if you have been in those areas, that you are required to go for testing, and you might be required to stay at home for 2 weeks. So this testing is really done, and the tracing is really used to limit to try and block the transmission, right? The other thing that they're doing, which is quite interesting here, is they do this surveillance on the sewage, right? And they test sewage regularly in the various cities, and they can detect the presence of SARS-CoV-2 viruses in the sewage water, right? From either your feces or from, you washing your hands, or, other bodily fluids. And even though they might not have a case in that area that they have detected yet, they can put an alert out and say, we have detected SARS-CoV-2 in the sewage. If you have a symptom, come forward to get tested. So it actually makes people aware that if they have a little bit of a sniffle, or if they have like a little bit of a sore throat, not to be complacent, to come forward for testing. And that kind of keeps us always on the alert. And on top of that, there's a lot of information tools that they use, or that they've put together, so that people can identify their risk and identify if they need to get tested, right? Because the testing is really our best weapon at the moment to identify who is carrying the viruses. So there's like a number of maps, interactive maps that they will put out, and they will identify down to the shop which shop or which places infected people have been to during what time, and again, that allows you to identify your own personal risk and allows you to decide whether or not you need to go to get tested. And to help with this, they've now, I think most states have these check-in apps where you have to use your phone when you go into any public places. In fact, I have to use this app when I go to my own office. I have to check in with the app in my office. I have to check in if I go to a different side of the building. So if any of us are sick, using the database that they get from the data that they get from this app, they can actually then contact you and let you know whether you've been in close contact with someone who's been positive. But even with all these in place, at the moment, Australia is experiencing a third wave now in Sydney, right? And the weakest link from everything that Australia has done is the borders, right? Because we know that when we manage to get down to zero, we know that the virus will come from outside. So the borders are our weakest link, right? Australia is one of the countries that have implemented pretty harsh hotel quarantine policies, right? It's a mandatory 14-day quarantine in a dedicated hotel. You can't go out for any reason. In fact, they take away your key. My husband went to quarantine. He did not even have access to his hotel room key. That was with the police who was guarding the hotel. So the hotel quarantine is pretty strict, right? But even with this, we have seen the virus jumping through, right? And we have seen the virus jumping through between rooms. And at the moment, the authorities here are trying to identify how is the virus able to jump between rooms. And one of the issues with these hotels, modern hotels, is that very often they share the air handling unit, right? The air conditioning is shared between rooms. And they think that might be one of the possibility for viruses jumping between rooms, between people that are in hotel quarantine. So there is a lot of talk at the moment to build designated quarantine facilities where all of these requirements are taken into consideration. So how the air is circulated, to make sure that everything is isolated, to make sure that people have access to fresh air. So one of the things that for sure was evident when my husband went to quarantine is that you could not open your windows. So for 14 days, you are stuck in a room with air conditioning, which potentially can carry the virus from your next door neighbor. So I think there's a lot of issues with that. Airline staff have sometimes been the sources of breaches. And if not, staff that serve the airline staff, so like the drivers that drive the airline staff. In fact, at the moment, the Sydney wave has started from the driver that actually drives foreign airline staff. So I can't remember which country the airline staff came from, who turned out to be positive, infected a driver who was not vaccinated. And then that driver infected his wife and other people. So, I mean, there are still issues with that, and that is still weakest link. But going back to how did Australia actually manage this. I think from the beginning, it was very obvious that there was a very clear structure in how the government was making the decision. And one very interesting thing, so if you remember, Australia is a federation, right? So it's got 7 states. So instead of going through the normal parliament, because this is an emergency, what they did is they formed the National Security Cabinet, where you have the Prime Minister and the premiers from each of the states. So it's not just the federal government here making the decision, because the federal government needs to talk to all of the different states and needs to work together with the different states. So this National Security Committee cabinet is the one that was making all the decision. And this way they were able to make decisions very fast, and they had support from both sides of politics. And I think that's very important. It was very clear at the beginning of last year that they were trying to keep politics out of this, and there was no bickering about it, so that the government could get on with the business of trying to keep the country safe. So I think that has been probably an advantage. But under all that, they are getting advices from various layers, right? You've got from the health sector who are helping them make the decision. You've got the TGA, and interestingly, in Australia, they've got a chief medical officer who advises the Prime Minister. And at the beginning of the pandemic last year, all of the health-related announcements were made by the chief medical officer, not necessarily by the Prime Minister.
Dr. Ines, I'm very sorry, 1 minute to go.
Okay, so what did Australia do right? From the beginning, there was no denial. There was a strong public health response. There was strong borders, engagement with the public, and dynamic. So it followed the evidence, but it did a few things wrong. It actually, and Australia being in a multicultural country, there was some racism around it. There were some issues around aged care and issues around quarantine. And the political debate came in later once we were down to 0, whether we should go for elimination or suppression. The vaccine rollout has been very slow. So you can see here that Australia's vaccine rollout was very slow until about April, and it's only very recently taking off, but it's very far from what's happening in the United Kingdom. And it's barely above in Indonesia, but remember, Australia has only 30 million people. The research community has been working very closely together with the government, and I think that's a plus to the to the approach. And they've been working on various aspects, from clinical trials to validating test kits, and we can talk about that later. And also, academics have been playing a big role in the communication. So I think I'll leave this here, and I'll use the next couple of slides for this discussion points later on.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Ines, for sharing your experience in Australia, and also but while watching what happened in Indonesia. So if I may sum up a little bit of points. So Australia has a very good emergency responses, listen to advices from scientific and medical experts, and keep the politics away. But every country has their own right and wrong moves, but this is why we're learning from other countries. So actually, we also have one more speaker, is Professor Abdul Qadir, Director General of Health Services Ministry of Health, Republic of Indonesia. But he apologized because he could not join us, because he has to accompany Coordinating Minister for Maritime and Investment Affairs to monitor emergency COVID-19 hospital in East Jakarta. So we now move on to the question and answer sessions, and I will ask some of the participants' burning questions. So so you can put your questions in the chat, and I will do my best to ask the questions. So the first one is for Professor Amarila Malik. from Ananta Evander, from Marcus, sorry. So why vaccines are produced by the former minister, Dr. Terawan, until now are not recommended by the Indonesian government? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Hi, Marcus. Thank you for a nice question. The vaccine Nusantara is actually still under clinical trial and evaluation guided by our Badan POM RI. So the process of this vaccine development is actually not as less expensive as the common vaccine like inactivated, the RNA, and the recombinant one. This is rather an immunotherapeutic stuff than the common vaccine that we familiar with. The process for this therapy is pretty personalized. That firstly, the patient's blood need to be checked in the laboratory and then propagated to obtain the dendritic cells, expose them to the virus, so the dendritic cell become well armed to guard the patient from COVID-19 and return to the patient. That's the idea, so quite different from the common vaccine, but it's under clinical trial and evaluation guided by Badan POM RI.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Amarila. So every single vaccine needs to be following the guidelines, and of course, it's still so every vaccine needs to be following the clinical trial first until it's considered safe for human use. So another related questions from Rio, University of Glasgow. So the first challenge that we or he see during the pandemic is from the politicization of early developed technologies, which may or may not be ready for community use due to the lack of experimental or trial data. Would the experts agree to this as being challenge that needs to be dealt or regulated in the future? And if so, how would you resolve this? I believe Professor Amarila and Dr. Ines can answer this.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Hi, Rio. I agree with you, and it was a priceless lesson for us to develop from such scratch technology. So let's hope that from now on, the government will switch gear to start producing our own vaccine by learning from and partnered under a strong GN2G agreement with successful neighboring countries like India. Let's hope for that.
If I can, I'll add on to that. So I agree. There's been a lot of politicization around innovation in Indonesia, and I think that's been clear at various levels with a number of different things, right? Clinical trials, testing kits, vaccines, and I think it probably comes down to how it is communicated, right? I mean, I think we are all very eager to see innovation being the savior, right? But we also need to realize that innovation needs to be backed up by a very strong infrastructure system, right? It needs to be backed up by very rigorous testing and validation, and all of this needs time, needs money, needs resources, and at no point can we actually jump any of these stages, because in fact we are putting a lot of people at risk. And I think what is happening during the pandemic is part of a learning process and an education process, and really people like me, myself and Professor Amarila, it is our role to explain this. Innovation is not simple. Innovation is not instant. Innovation needs investment, like it's been discussed first. So I think we also need to realize our limitation and not not use politics to override processes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ines and Professor Amarila. Probably Pak Faisal would like to add some, because as Dr. Ines says, innovation is not simple and it's investment. So how can government really select which innovations that is actually need the investment and which one is probably can be saved for other things like testing and tracing facilities? Pak Faisal. You're still muted, Pak Faisal.
I have no knowledge about this, but what I have in mind is, okay, no patent needed anymore. So it is better for us to manufacture directly, to produce as much as possible to all the people of Indonesia. That's the shortcut we can do, considering no patent anymore for the vaccine.
Can I add on to that?
Innovation need time, you know. Innovation
Yes,
need time.
definitely. Yes.
And also, patents are not the only barrier, right? Because you need to have the ecosystem, you need to have the infrastructure, you need to have the people. So it's not just, you know, I think we think sometimes that patents are the only barrier. The know-how is actually sometimes more important than the patent. So what we really need to take from this crisis is the need to build this ecosystem in Indonesia. From now on, starting from the innovation right down to the manufacturing, we need to use this crisis as a turning point to invest in that, so we are never again faced with what we are seeing now.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ines. This is very interesting because Pak Faisal already also mentioned vaccines and the ecosystem that we need to do the innovation and bring it to the manufacturing process. So we have another question related to that. Is from Muhammad Zaki from SMA Negeri 1 Solok. He asked, can we produce ourselves vaccines then import? So we can decrease the import activities, and then probably we can also export our vaccines, and it will be new income and help humanity. Professor Amarila probably can also answer this.
Thank you, Fiona. Hi, Zaki. Your idea is the same as mine, actually. Let's hope that the government will do this. We can follow India, for example. You can check on their website, Bharat Biotech, as I showed in my slide number 16. Bharat Biotech in India has been famous for pharmacy of the world, but India actually took a very long time to build their empire on pharma manufacturers. Well, like Dr. Ines said, that we have to start now. So this is actually the moment, but I leave it to the government. I'm an academician, actually. Thank you.
Okay, probably Dr. Ines has addition to this.
I mean, I think we have great manufacturing capacity in the vaccine space, right? Biopharma is one of the largest vaccine manufacturers in Southeast Asia. It exports to hundreds of countries as it is. However, at the moment, the issue, because this is a disease that did not exist before 2020, before January 2020, what we needed is not, the problem is not just the manufacturing, the problem is the actual development, right? So this is, you know, this is where India is probably, has probably a advantage over us. I think India has invested a lot in its innovation. We see you know, like a lot of publications, a lot of patents, a lot of products coming out of India. So I think this is again a lesson for us. We need to build that capacity, but we also need to be able to be agile, right? So I think certainly one of my lessons or biggest frustrations through the pandemic was, you know, a lot of things in the innovation or research space has been like business as usual, right? I applied with colleagues in Indonesia for a grant. The application went in May or June, right? And then we didn't hear anything until December, and then the funding came in April, right? So we had the idea last year in April, but the funding only came down this April, right? How are we able to innovate if the funding doesn't come down fast, right? So I think this is exactly, I mean, that's an issue, right? So it's an administrative issue. We can't, so this is, I mean, something that was done differently in Australia. The grant system was 6 weeks, right? It took 6 weeks we had like people had 2 weeks to apply, 6 weeks to get the results, right? You can't, in a crisis, you can't do things like business as usual.
Yes, definitely. So we're in crisis. So it actually should be done in like an emergency response situation. Talking about funding and talking about this administrative process, there's a question from Ananta Evander from University of Bristol in the UK. So I have a question for Mr. Faisal Basri. How the government can maintain the equilibrium between economic recovery and ensuring strong support for public health response in COVID-19, whether a strong contact tracing system allow the resume of economic activities without the need of hard lockdown. So that's the question, Pak Faisal.
I just like to add the previous issue dealing with financing. I think financing is not an issue. It depends on political will. So the government inject hundreds trillion rupiah for state-owned enterprise, including Bank BNI, sponsors of these events, ya. Bank BNI and BTN, trillions rupiah. So I think if we ask Ibu Ines or Ibu Ila, we do not need a lot of money, 100 trillions. We start with 1 trillion, maybe enough to do jumpstart, innovations. So we do the parallel way, developing innovation as well as manufacturing existing vaccine available. So it is very difficult to answer the questions equilibrium. What is equilibrium? It's very difficult, very different from country to country. Ibu Ines explained to us very clearly what needed. Again, it's different from country to country, but the most important things is, clear coordination, strong coordination between, in Australia, federal government and state level government. In Indonesia, of course, central government and local government. You see, local government like Sri Sultan in Yogyakarta or Pak Ganjar in Central Java or Governor of Jawa Barat, they are waiting for guidance from central government. Guidance from where? From Pak Luhut, from Pak Budi Gunadi, from Erick Thohir, no one knows. Dealing with tabung gas, for example. So again, just follow the best practice. We can learn from Australia, maybe from India, from many countries, the best practice is already there. And then secondly, communication to the people should be clear. Under a control of health, what we call it, Ibu, health director general, something like that in Australia. Here, you see. So again, I think equilibrium different from time to from country to country. It depends on the magnitude of the virus. Secondly, the healthcare capacity system, curve popular curve used by many analysts to do this. And thirdly, the structure of the social structure in that countries need a different intervention. So you cannot apply the best practice, successful story in Jakarta to Bali. Cannot. So we have empowered local people under the guidelines of central government, under the guidelines of federal government in the case of Australia. So that's what missing. That's missing in Indonesia. And one more thing, local government has no money at all because 85%, that is in my PowerPoint. I didn't explain this, but you can see almost 95% of total national revenue controlled by central government. Provincial government depend heavily on car taxes, vehicle taxes, and kabupaten or kota level, municipality level depend on hotels and food and beverages. So all these sectors are in the bottom, at the bottom. So without help from central government, they cannot do anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Faisal Basri. Unfortunately, we are running out of time for now, and we now have to bring this to a close. But in summary, there are some major points that we have to fulfill in terms of becoming a pandemic resilient country. And the first one is we have to keep in mind that the solution is not simple. Like innovation is not simple and needs time, and it's of course investment, and it also needs ecosystem for research and innovation that can resulting in applicable innovation without wasting the government or investment money. And the next is clear and strong coordination between the central government and the local government. And this will bring us also to the importance of political will of every country, including Indonesia. Communication to the people should be clear because we cannot afford confusion between the people in this crisis, in this situation. And that's how it is. We have to learn from the best practice because we probably fortunate that we are not the first country who deal with this, so we can actually learn from Australia, from the USA. Take the good and leave the bad. Probably that's the message for becoming pandemic resilient country. And I also apologize that we could not get to all of your questions from the participants, but please join me in thanking our knowledgeable panelists by giving them virtual applauses, if you can. And thank you very much, everyone, and see you in ISIC's parallel sessions. Allow me to give a pantun from Indonesia. So, roses are red, violets are blue. The virus is strong, but so are you. Thank you very much.